If you're a cynic like me, you always feel like the employer is on the back foot. They always seem to get things wrong. The employee always wants to stick it to the man, but the employer is trying to navigate the workplace as best they can. So I ask you, when's the last time you heard a story where the employer came out on top? I know for me, it's been a while, but that's why you're here, right? Because in today's episode, we're going to get into a very interesting new case where the Employment Relations Authority turned around and told the employer that, guess what? You didn't unjustifiably dismiss that employee. So if you want to know how to make sure that your dismissals are up to par and you've done everything correctly and by the book, then this episode is just for you. Hi everyone, welcome back to Lawlands. My name is Sanam and thank you so much for tuning in to the Employment Law Done Right podcast. I know I have been very, very bad at putting out episodes and I completely understand you must be fed up. I get it. It's a lot of false promises and I keep saying that I'll be back to doing weekly episodes and all of these promises have just gone on. And this year alone, I have only put out 6 episodes. So I completely get it. But all I can say to you is I am sorry. And I honestly, genuinely was going to get back into the swing of things a couple of weeks ago when I said that I was going to release my fortnightly episode and then move into weekly. Even so much as recording my episode and editing it, it's ready to go for next week, but it is a little bit old and archaic at the moment, so I'm tweaking it up. Basically, what happened there, I can't really talk about it, unfortunately, but I promise you that this is definitely one that I will talk about. It will probably happen sometime next year, and when I do have a chat to you about it, we will probably need either a gin and tonic or a whiskey when we get into the chat. So I will make an episode out of it, and I'm very excited. That was the first thing I thought of was, ooh, this has to be an episode, but unfortunately it won't happen now. So instead I come bringing you positive news. We rarely hear about an employer coming out on the other side of an unjustified dismissal claim, doing the right thing. And you know what I mean. When we hear that something went to the Employment Relations Authority and the employer actually dismissed an employee, we know what's coming. The employer did everything incorrectly. They should have ticked this box. They should have followed procedural fairness. They should have justified everything. But in today's episode, we are tackling a case that relates to Sahil and First Security Guard Services Limited. I'm not going to keep saying that. I'll call them First Security. But this was a great example of what to do as an employer. And I love cases like this. And it was just a good way to show that employers can get it right. Large companies can get it right. Small companies can get it right. And guess what? You can get it right. If you want to make sure that your dismissals are correct, to make sure that your disciplinaries are correct, to make sure that you are doing everything possible to mitigate the risk of an unjustified dismissal claim, then this episode is going to tackle all of that. But before we get into it, I just wanted to say, if you want to stay ahead of the curve and make sure that you are doing things compliantly without paying thousands and thousands of dollars for a lawyer, someone like me, then follow the Employment Law Done Right podcast and make sure that you check out my newsletter as well. I am going to be, like I said, putting out more and more content. Now I am free as a bird and I will be out there and definitely engaging with all of you a lot more. So trust me on this one. We are boots to the ground and we are going to be moving forward and Lawlands cannot be stopped. Before we get into it fully, you know what time it is. It's time for Laughs with Lawlands, where I give you a dry joke in these episodes. Why did the security guard bring a ladder to work? Because he was told the job had high expectations. Well, I told you today's episode is about First Security, and why not a security related joke? You know, today's case really proves that not only were the expectations quite high in the job, but they were clearly spelled out and still quite spectacularly ignored by the employee. Let's really break down how First Security nailed the process and why the unjustified dismissal claim got thrown into the reject box. We'll set the scene first so that you get a rough idea of who these characters are. Well, they are real people, but you know what I mean. So I'll set the scene. We've got Mr. Sahil, who was employed as a shift manager. He was also known as an Alpha 6. That's another word for them as shift managers. And they basically act as first responders, is the best way to say this, in the security field, obviously not as a paramedic. They act as roaming managers responsible for visiting sites, doing quality checks on the guards, and they also make sure that they are covering shifts, and leading by example is a very key component of what they do, given their title as well. In this particular scenario, this employee, Sahil, was dismissed for serious misconduct. He claimed that he was unjustifiably dismissed and unjustifiably disadvantaged. And First Security said, look, no, we actually followed all of the rules here. So let's see what Sahil did to actually lead to the dismissal, because it always gets a little bit interesting, right? That's where we get into the nuances of the case, is the facts around the case, and then also how the case was handled by the employer. If we look at where the red flags really were, Sahil would leave shifts early, the company vehicle was returned quite early to the main depot, and a lot of times what he was doing was actually caught on GPS tracking for the vehicle and also CCTV in the workplace. So it clearly showed him finishing up early. Then it also came to light that he was using the company car for personal errands. Sometimes he'd take a trip home, sometimes he'd go to the physio for his back, and this was all without authorization or prior permission. And then as the investigation meeting happened, which I'll definitely get into, he said that he could basically work from anywhere. He said, oh, I've got a company laptop, I've got a work phone, and all of these things can easily be done from my car, from my couch, while I'm watching movies. It's all part of the deal. Another thing that was a little bit suspicious for First Security as well was that Sahil would manage to visit on average 5 sites per shift. But when we looked at the other employees, they were doing around 16 site visits. Huge discrepancy, right? Now we've got a major difference. And one of the things that Sahil mentioned as part of the investigation process was that he was on standby. And when he was watching movies, he was still on standby. He was chilling in his car. He had his phone. He had his work laptop. He might have been watching movies. There were instances, unfortunately, that for about 5 hours, that's what he was doing. But he said, no, I'm on call. I was just waiting for the next emergency or waiting for the next call or waiting to respond to one of the sites. But these are all looking like Sahil wasn't doing the right thing. And First Security is now picking up on them. Let's see what the employer did to address these concerns. The case touched on the critical parts of the law, but what I want to do for you is peel this back a lot more and go a lot deeper and look at step by step what they did and pinpoint exactly where they went right in the situation. More so than just looking at section blah, blah, blah of the Employment Relations Act. This is more looking at what we know from cases time and time again works for an employer. Okay, so let's look at the process. They nailed this process from the start. There were no ambiguous bits here and there. There was no gaps in anything. They knew what they were doing. And it was important to make sure that the process was followed because there are key components of what needs to be done. And we've seen this from cases. When First Security caught wind that things were going wrong, this all kind of came about on the 9th of January last year. There was an informal meeting between Sahil and his manager, and they had an informal meeting about the fact that Sahil was failing to notify the company about his absences, he wasn't covering shifts, and he wasn't completing the reporting that he needed to report. So this was on the 9th of Jan. Then on the 11th of Jan, they sent a letter to him saying that, look, I just want to let you know this was the informal chat that we had, and I want to outline our expectations moving forward. Now, what do we know about this? This is something I hammer on about time and time again. I've even done an episode on it where verbal warnings are obsolete. Try a letter of expectations instead, because letters of expectation are really great at saying, hey, guess what? I spoke to you on such and such date. These are the expectations that we have. This isn't disciplinary action, but I'm just letting you know that if you do this again, we may have to go down a disciplinary process because I just want you to know that these are the expectations that we require of you moving forward. Now, the great thing is that even though it's informal, you're setting the scene. You're setting the scene to make sure that when you have another incident that's similar, you can leverage off of this and say, look, I gave you an opportunity to get better. I put it in writing. I spoke to you, but you still haven't tried to get back onto the right path. So that was the 9th and the 11th. Then what ended up happening was between around the 10th to the 16th of January, there was an investigation that triggered. And the investigation was because there was more and more coming out. What happened as part of the investigation was looking into the GPS tracking, looking into the CCTV footage, also making sure that all the checks and balances were done on the information gathering. And so what's critical here is that we're looking at the 9th of January being the date that the informal discussion happened, 11th of January being the time that the letter of expectations was sent, and then kicking off an investigation immediately after more issues started coming up. So they didn't sit on it. By the 16th of January, they had already gathered information as more and more came to light. And what that meant was that they kicked off an investigation properly on the 19th of January. Sahil's general manager was the one that kicked off the investigation meeting. And see the timeline here, 16th, they finished, they found everything that they think are allegations here from what they could see in the GPS and CCTV records. Then on the 19th of January, they invite Sahil to a meeting. The letter is sent to him. It details allegations outlining what the GPS data says, what the records say for the CCTV footage. It invites him to a meeting and it gives him enough time to come to that meeting. So the 23rd of January is when they scheduled that meeting. He was asked to bring a support person or a representative, and he was even told that he could seek advice. He was given that opportunity. That is a very critical thing that a lot of employers miss along the way. I know that it's very difficult to say openly that, yep, if you want to bring a support person, go ahead, because it feels like you're opening yourself up to something that you don't want to be a part of, because you don't want to be sitting in that meeting with the support person maybe popping off or a representative looking very intimidating, but it is a requirement and something that employers should offer to employees, and they should be very much encouraged to bring one in if that's something that they want to do. On the 23rd of January, that's when the investigation meeting happened. This is where Sahil decided to attend without a support person. But the company didn't stop there. They took a moment and they confirmed whether he wanted to proceed without a support person. He was then asked if he wanted to proceed without a representative. And at both times, he said, yep, I'm happy to just proceed. And that was all recorded in the meeting notes. This is another thing that I always tell HR professionals, employers to do, because it is important. You need to make sure that you are keeping a record of the fact that you have asked this and that you've confirmed with the employee that they're happy to proceed. Why? No ambiguity. Employee can never come back and say, hey, you never actually checked in with me, or you never said anything about my support person or representative. I felt like I couldn't bring one in, any of that kind of stuff. It leaves no room for that to be brought up. In that investigation meeting, we saw Sahil make some admissions to watching movies in his car, also using the company car for personal reasons, and claiming that his role was actually fully something that you could do remote. Like I said before, he said that I have the ability to carry my work laptop around, I've got my work phone, and because of that, I am able to be remote, fully remote, and I don't really need to be at the head office. What I find interesting is that normally what happens is you kick off an investigation meeting, ask the employee these questions, then you enter into a situation where you go, okay, well, his explanations and his answers aren't really that great. I think what we'll do is we have enough to go on here and we'll just start a disciplinary process. But a lot of times that's a misstep on the employer's part. And it's because I feel that a lot of businesses are just trying to get the process moving because it's uncomfortable and you feel like you have all the evidence on hand. But where First Security took it that extra step further, which is just chef's kiss, is looking at further inquiries and digging a bit deeper. After that meeting on the 23rd, First Security, between the 24th and the 25th of January, actually went and investigated further. So the national manager that was running all of these investigations and meetings went a bit further and looked into Sahil's explanations. One of them, for example, was that Sahil said that he was able to leave early because they said that he could. When they went to the New Zealand Defence Force and actually asked them, hey, is this what happened? He confirmed that no, Sahil left without any direction. Then there was another situation where Sahil said that my direct manager said that, look, you can work from home and you don't need to come into the office. When that was investigated a little bit more, there was a conversation that was had with the national delivery manager. And the manager said, no. On the 14th of August last year, I actually sent an email which explained that people in this particular role with the Alpha 6, or in other words, what Sahil does, which is the shift manager, they are not able to work from home because they need to actually do handovers. They need to come back into the head office. So this didn't corroborate what Sahil was trying to argue here. And then the manager also went so far as to say that there was no permission to go to these physio visits or anything like that as well. So with that, the employer thought, okay, now we've got enough information here to go on and look at doing a disciplinary process. On the 26th of January, without leaving any time in between, Sahil was handed a disciplinary invitation letter, what they had in that disciplinary invitation letter was allegations, of course, as you would. Allegations were very clear, but also they had a copy of the employment agreement when they referred to it. They had a copy of the code of conduct, GPS data, in time schedules, investigation meeting notes to show what Sahil's responses were. They also had a copy of the statement from Sahil's direct report, and they also had a copy of a statement from the security guard at New Zealand Defence Force site. They went above and beyond and gathered as much information as they could and made sure that they had a clear defense to back themselves if anything went wrong. Then on the 31st of January, so remember, invitation was sent out on the 26th of January. The meeting was held on the 31st of January. At this meeting, with the disciplinary meeting, Sahil attended with the union support person. In that conversation and in his feedback, he made further admissions about sitting in the car because it was more comfortable, being at home due to a friend's mother visiting, and tried to justify and provide reasoning as to why he broke company policy and breached his employment agreement. As a normal disciplinary process goes, what they did was they stepped back and they looked at the evidence in front of them. And then on the 7th of February, Sahil received a preliminary outcome letter or a preliminary decision letter. And what that said in there was that this is serious misconduct. If it's substantiated, then the dismissal will occur without notice, and that will be likely the situation. On the 8th of February, there was a meeting that was held so that Sahil could provide feedback. He apologized, but it didn't really change the employer's view of the situation. So what they did on the 13th of February was make a decision to dismiss and confirm the dismissal. And in that letter, it really clearly broke down the fact that the trust and confidence is broken and it cannot be repaired. So because of this, they are proceeding with a dismissal. Now, fascinating, right? The fact that they set out their expectations beforehand, had an employee that was clearly abusing the system and not doing the right thing, but at every turn made sure that they followed the procedural requirements correctly. They also justified and had a clear reasoning as to why they were going down this path. And it's not only because of the fact that they had CCTV footage or GPS records, but because they relied on their employment agreement, code of conduct. They had the meeting notes. They also had the statements corroborating that Sahil wasn't doing the right thing and had lied about these site visits and about the fact that he could work from home. All of that added to their case. And you might be wondering, so Sanam, why does it matter? What's all of this about? Because Section 103A of the Employment Relations Act says that a dismissal needs to be both substantively and procedurally justified. So how do they meet that? Well, they investigated it. It wasn't a knee-jerk reaction. They gathered objective evidence, like I said. They reviewed company agreements and policies and role expectations, even down to the job description and what was required. They provided specific allegations, and specific allegations were key, right? So many times in disciplinary letters or investigation letters, I see that dates, times, locations, people, who was involved, the who, what, when, where, why, how, all of that is just missing. But what was really cool was that in this particular case, they had all of that in their allegations. They even gave Sahil a chance to bring a support person to explain himself. They followed that procedural fairness aspect. So this is why it hit every limb of Section 103A(3). And what's so critical is that you can see the time frame that this took. They didn't do undue delay, but they made sure that they bothered to consider his feedback. They made sure that they actually gave him a chance to respond and that he was given all of the time, all of the information that he needed. It wasn't just a box ticking exercise. They dug deeper. And after Sahil said that my old boss said I could work from anywhere, they went back and asked, did he really? Rather than making the assumption of, oh, he's just lying. No one said that. Because you never know. This is something that I always talk about, especially when I'm dealing with HR teams and things like that. I always say to them, are you 100% sure that this manager didn't say this? What's your evidence to make sure? Because so many times have I seen a Teams message or a Slack message or an email or a note even that goes to the employee that absolutely corroborates what the employee is saying. So you want to make sure that you've checked, made sure, and really dug deep to find out whether that has happened or not. So with all of that bundled, it really showed the authority that the employer took Sahil's side of the story seriously. It showed that they did their due diligence, that they didn't just say this is nonsense, it's unnecessary, he's just giving excuses. They said, okay, let's see if this really checks out. And this is the gold standard, the peak, the penultimate thing that you've got to reach for good faith under Section 4 of the legislation. Providing information, allowing comments, and making sure that a decision is made only after the employee has been given everything possible so that they know that, look, this is all the information we've got, everything at hand, and if we terminate you, then we've given you everything. We haven't misled you. We have been communicative. We've done everything that we are meant to do. What this all really rested on was the fact that the role required trust, right? He was a person that was in a role that required high levels of trust. He was responsible for real-time responses, going and checking on guards, making sure that client sites were compliant, and also making sure that health and safety requirements were not breached. By going AWOL during shifts and just completely going MIA and watching movies in his car and not reporting where he was, he really failed to meet the expectations of his role. And when you go back and have a look at the job description and the requirements of his employment agreement, you can see that he failed to carry out key job functions as per his job description. He breached health and safety obligations, especially if you've got health and safety policies, obligations in your employment agreement. Usually employers will detail some obligations towards the top of the agreement. All of that needs to be pulled and drawn out. And he even went so far as to undermine the operational integrity of the business and created reputational and insurance risk. These are all things that you can absolutely spell out as an employer. Why it really helped the employer frame this whole idea of serious misconduct is that under the employment agreement, serious misconduct was very clearly laid out. It was failing to perform duties, disobeying instructions, and undermining trust and confidence. And the Employment Relations Authority said the employer had grounds to say that the trust was gone. The dismissal without notice, absolutely justified. Isn't that mind-boggling? I am going to do an episode in a few weeks' time. I've already got it prepped and ready to go. Like I said, there was a lot of movement happening on my end, but we will talk about it next year. But in that episode, I wanted to talk about summary dismissal because there's a lot of people out there that are like, can I just terminate this person on the spot? They've done a lot of bad things. What can I do? But this is one of those situations. This was a summary dismissal where they terminated the employee without notice and it was completely justified. But it wasn't a situation where they just pulled them into a meeting, did a disciplinary, and ended it there. They followed everything to the T. And they didn't gloss over fairness. They showed fairness at every turn. And what the Employment Relations Authority saw was that there was a well-structured, transparent, and responsive disciplinary process as well. So what is the key takeaways for employers? I think I've gone through quite a few and spoken to you about them, but I just want to make sure that I hone in on these 5. You need to set expectations early, and you need to do it across the board with everyone, and you need to treat them all the same. And setting expectations means that you're not singling a particular person out. You've got your policies and you've got your documents in place, and this is just a reminder the employee that, look, just like everyone else, you are also required to make sure that you follow the rules, and this is what we expect of you moving forward. Making sure that you even go so far as to document those expectations. Now, don't go into every informal meeting with a pen and paper, writing and scribbling everything down. Don't bring the entourage of the manager, the employer, and this person. Don't make it look intimidating. Just make sure that after you have those informal chats where you're setting an expectation, that you send out a letter of expectation, and make sure that you go in with that game plan. Making sure that you follow a procedure correctly is really important. I had somebody come over a couple of weeks ago that was actually working on some things in their father's business. And one of the things that they brought up was, do I need to do an investigation meeting, or what would I do? An investigation meeting would only really come up if you have allegations that you think might not be as clear cut and could have other explanations. And sometimes you might just want to take that extra step and actually investigate rather than go down a disciplinary process. But sometimes you don't even have to do that. You can go into a disciplinary and that can be kind of like your investigation. Regardless, though, it's important to investigate thoroughly, especially when explanations start sounding a little bit suspicious or they give you a rebuttal or a reason, and you want to make sure that you corroborate and actually make sure that you go in and find out more information about it. Don't just make assumptions. And making sure that trust and confidence isn't the buzzwords that you use. You know, everybody loves to sprinkle undermining trust and confidence and all of those things. But when it's gone and you followed a process correctly, the dismissal could be a justifiable dismissal. And that is key and that is important. What do you think? Do you feel positive about this? Do you feel a bit lighter? Do you feel like there's a light at the end of the tunnel and that the employer has actually done the right thing here? I feel really good. It's lovely to see cases like this where the employer comes out on top. And look, there's so so many different opinions out there. I absolutely get it. And my opinion always is going to be that employees do the wrong things. Just like there are some bad employers out there, there are some bad employees out there. And unfortunately, the world that we live in right now is very people first and employee focused, but you can't bring every employee back on track. As much as people want to believe that, there are some people that are very, very hard to bring on track, and it's not an employer's responsibility to spend years and years trying to do that, especially when they can pack up and move on to the next employee that will uplift culture, make sure that they follow the right rules, and make sure that they actually do right in the employment relationship and also act in good faith. So if you're on board with that and you're on board with what Law Lens is all about and you like the Employment Law Done Right podcast, then please give the podcast a follow. Make sure that you reach out if you've got any questions and subscribe to the newsletter because it is getting exciting. Thank you so much, everyone. That is it from me. I hope you are keeping warm and staying safe during the cold winter months rolling in. If you are struggling with compliance, then remember Law Lens is always here to help you understand and navigate the law as a business, as a manager, as an employer, as a HR professional. That is it for me, everyone. I hope you have a lovely morning, evening, night, afternoon, whatever it may be. And guess what? I'll actually catch you in the next one, everyone.